In the wake of the massive success of the movie Star Wars, Hollywood studios began looking to jump on the space opera bandwagon with projects coming to both the big and small screen. With that in mind, producer Glenn A. Larson dusted off an old concept for a series he pitched back in the 60s and then repitched it to ABC under the title of Adam's Ark. Adam's Ark revolved around a group of people fleeing Earth in the wake of a nuclear attack. The group would then begin a desperate search for a new planet while fending off alien attackers along the way. Larson would end up tweaking the premise, no doubt partially inspired by the pseudoscience philosophy of Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods, instead now having the group looking for Earth, which was a lost colony of a group of worlds in the wake of an alien attack. He also sci-fied up some of the names, Adam becoming Adama, as well as drawing from the Greek pantheon of gods with names like Apollo, Athena, and Cassiopeia. Larson would also alter the ship in question, making a warship leading a convoy rather than a massive single-craft caravan. He would christen the ship a Battlestar, which ran afoul of George Lucas, as Battlestar sounded a little too similar to Death Star. This resulted in a legal battle, which would be settled out of court in 1983. Originally, Larson envisioned Battlestar Galactica as being in the vein of NBC's mystery properties like Columbo or McMillan and Wife, i.e., instead of getting week-to-week episodes, viewers would get a movie that came out every other month or so. This would help alleviate some of the budgetary concerns of basically trying to do Star Wars on television on a regular basis. However, ABC felt differently and instead commissioned 24 episodes with a 1 3-hour-long pilot, not to mention 17 one-shot episodes and 5 two-part episodes. The two-part episodes, along with the 3-hour pilot, would actually be compiled into movies and sold in international markets like Canada and Japan. Battlestar Galactica would prove to be a success. Unfortunately, just not enough of a success. Initial ratings were high, but they began to steadily drop, especially when CBS counter-programmed with two of its most popular shows, All in the Family and Alice. Not to mention, just as Larson feared, the ratings just weren't high enough to justify the show's massive budget. Battlestar Galactica would be canceled in 1979 after its first season. Fans of the show took up a massive letter-writing campaign to save Battlestar Galactica, and ABC did take notice, deciding to revive the show under the banner of Galactica 1980. In order to alleviate the budgetary concerns, it was decided that at this point, Galactica would finally reach Earth and a bizarre time travel element would be used in order to better prepare the planet for defense against the attacking force known as the Cylons. This, coupled with the absence of mega-popular characters like Starbuck and Apollo, turned off many fans, and the show would wind up being cancelled after 13 episodes. Battlestar Galactica wouldn't completely vanish from airwaves, though, as there was some syndication thanks to the early days of cable TV, which allowed for even a show that lasted one season to rerun several times throughout the day. There were also VHS copies of those compiled movies I mentioned earlier. Not to mention there were several spin-off books. Also, of course, if you're a fan of the show Mystery Science Theater 3000, you would know that many of the effects from Battlestar Galactica got lifted and used in a South African science fiction film called Space Mutiny.
Look out, Red 3! Red 3 is down.
I never liked Red 3 anyway.
There would also be Battlestar Galactica comics, most notably a 23-issue-long series published by Marvel Comics which came out during the show's initial run. There would also be a series published by Rob Liefeld's Maximum Press in the mid-90s. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the reimagining of Battlestar Galactica headed up by Star Trek alum Ronald Moore that aired on the Sci-Fi Channel from 2003 to 2009. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into that because today's story is set in the original Battlestar Galactica universe, not the reimagined Battlestar Galactica universe. So you're going to have to get used to the characters of Starbuck and Boomer looking like this, and not so much like this. Sorry. On the plus side, though, it was because of that success of the reimagined series that today's storyline actually exists. In 2006, Dynamite Entertainment acquired the license for Battlestar Galactica and immediately began an ongoing title set in the reimagined timeline. After a few months, they decided to tickle the nostalgia bone and also release a classic Battlestar Galactica book. And today, we're going to take a look at the first 5 issues of Dynamite Entertainment's classic Battlestar Galactica. This is Classic Battlestar Galactica. The Galactica arrives at the planet Mytoria in the constellation of Sagittarius. The Mytorians have a library, and the belief is some of the texts may hold the location of Earth. Unfortunately, the Cylons have already overwhelmed much of the planet, and it's unknown if there are any humans left. Commander Adama dispatches a trio of pilots, Apollo, Starbuck, and Boomer, to investigate to see if the books still exist. The trio's Viper attack crafts have been outfitted with cloaking devices to avoid Cylon detection. Everything appears to be going smoothly when suddenly Boomer's ship is struck by a Cylon raider. The Cylons are using thermal heat tracking, and so the cloaking devices really haven't worked at all. The Cylons soon take down Starbuck as well, and Apollo is forced to reluctantly flee. Starbuck does manage to survive his crash, though he has a chunk of debris sticking out of his left thigh. He notices the Cylons apparently pulling Boomer's dead body fresh from the wreckage of his downed fighter. Starbuck removes the shrapnel and patches his wound, passing out soon thereafter. He comes to just as he's discovered by the Cylons. Starbuck manages to get his blaster and take down 2 of the Cylons. He then begins stripping the 2 of their armor, after lighting a cigar. Okay, so here's the weird thing about the Cylons in the original Battlestar Galactica. Cylon is both the name of an anthropomorphic race of reptile beings and the robots that race created. Now, most of the reptile Cylons have died out, and the robot Cylons are basically just acting on their original orders, which is to eliminate the human race. Back on the Galactica, Apollo pleads with Adama to attempt a rescue mission. Unfortunately, the commander doesn't want to risk it. Even if the pilots are alive, the Cylon numbers are just too high, and the techs are likely destroyed. Apollo tries to get his sister Athena to help, but she's too shaken up about Starbuck. On Mytoria, Starbuck has outfitted himself in Cylon armor, which is able to absorb the Cylon blaster shots, and he then launches a suicide attack in order to get to a communication hub and hopefully call the Galactica. Just as he finds himself surrounded, Starbuck is able to find some unlikely assistance in the form of a cell of Mytorian fighters. The group is led by a woman named Stadra, and she orders Starbuck to remove the Cylon armor because there's tracking software in it. She then leads Starbuck back to the group's underground encampment. Stadra thinks that Starbuck is part of an evacuation force. However, the group's leader, who it turns out is Stadra's father, says otherwise. He's been told that Galactica is in all likelihood gone. His source? A still very much alive Boomer. Okay, so if you haven't figured yet, Starbuck is basically the cocky, fly by the seat of his pants, Han Solo-esque pilot in the series. He crashed his Viper combat jet no less than 4 times in the original run of the show. Now, Boomer, on the other hand, Boomer is a little more calm, he's a little more reserved. He's actually quite intelligent. He's not only just a pilot, but he's also a mechanic and engineer. And if you're wondering why I keep referring to these two by their call signs, well, because in the original Battlestar Galactica, they were just called Boomer and Starbuck. It wasn't until the 2003 reimagining series that they got full civilian names. Boomer explains that a cell of resistance fighters pulled him away from the Cylons during a skirmish. He seems to think that Adama and company believe the 2 pilots are dead, but Starbuck isn't too sure, as Apollo is far too loyal for something like that to happen. Back on Galactica, Apollo talks to his girlfriend Serena after putting her son Troy to bed. The 2 talk about Apollo relating a story where he and Starbuck promised not to mourn each other if the worst came to pass. Serena tells him that it's okay to break that promise, but Apollo won't start mourning now. If he started mourning, he'll never be able to stop. He's lost too much already. I know I'm probably too late on this, but yes, I am aware that Troy was technically called Boxy during the original run of Battlestar Galactica. He wouldn't receive his full name of Troy until Galactica 1980, but I'm not going to call him Boxy. That's just stupid. Also, there's Muffet 2, the robot Daggett, that's the Battlestar Galactica term for dog. That is Troy's pet that replaced a pet that he had that was killed during the original Cylon attack. Back with the Mytorian resistance, Starbuck begins formulating one last-ditch plan to attempt a distress call to Galactica. No one seems too enthused by the prospects, but Stadra begins to rally them to the idea. The rally is then interrupted by a Cylon attack. In order to evacuate the wounded refugees, Starbuck, Boomer, Stadra, and Danley, a skeptic who doesn't trust Starbuck, tried to draw the Cylons away. It's then that Danley notices something on Boomer's jacket. It's a Cylon homing beacon. Stadra is forced to talk Danley down, pointing out the device could have been placed on Boomer during the skirmish where he was rescued. It's enough, and the 4 soon meet up with the remaining resistance fighters. There, everyone begins working on a plan to swipe a Cylon carrier and use its radio to hopefully message Galactica. The plan is put into motion as the group lays a trap to steal a tank which they can use to Trojan horse their way onto a Cylon carrier. Danley doesn't follow the plan and stupidly tries to lead a small group of Cylons away, sacrificing himself in the process. The rest of the plan seems to go off without a hitch, with Starbuck and Stadra managing to commandeer the tank. However, Stadra's exuberance causes her to hug Starbuck, causing him to inadvertently hit the tank's controls, causing the tank to be steered into a nearby river. The remaining Resistance fighters are forced to continue on with their assault on the Cylon Central Command out of hopes that Starbuck can still send off the message to Galactica. Starbuck does manage to fire off the message, and Stadra gives him a good luck kiss as he opens the hatch door for a watery escape attempt. Starbuck and Stadra manage to reunite with the Resistance and Boomer, with Stadra denying that kiss meant anything more than just good luck, as the group succeeds in overtaking a small Cylon transport carrier. Starbuck manages to use his elite piloting skills, i.e. blind luck, to maneuver the ship back to the refugee camp. Not too long afterwards, the remaining Mytorians take off and leave Mytoria, where they can hopefully reunite with Galactica. The two vessels managed to connect on the outer edge of the solar system, as Adama was unsure if Starbuck's distress call was legit. The refugees are soon welcomed aboard, as Starbuck is forced to explain things to the three major women in his life. Yeah, during the original run of Battlestar Galactica, Starbuck was involved in a love triangle with Apollo's sister Athena and a socialator turned nurse named Cassiopeia. Socialator basically being the Battlestar Galactica term for a glorified prostitute. Anyway, basically what's happening here is Starbuck is introducing his new girlfriend, Stadra, to his two old girlfriends that he actually hasn't really broken up with. So, da-da-da-da-da-da. A banquet is thrown to honor the returning heroes, with the Galactica higher-ups looking forward to harvesting the Cylon technology in order to aid in the war. The Mytorians are happy to have escaped their own personal hell, and Starbuck is happy to finally get some alone time with Stadra. Unfortunately, it turns out there's a reason why the Mytorians' escape was so easy. There was actually a covert group of Cylon commandos stowing away on the carrier, and that group is now aboard the Galactica. The group happens across Stadra and Starbuck making out, and it stabs Stadra, killing her instantly. Okay, so the Cylon with the transparent conical head and the plasma orb brain is part of the IL series. Now, ILs basically act as kind of middle management Cylons between the Cylon foot soldier robots and the remaining members of the reptile Cylon race. Now, there were two prominent ILs on the show, one named Lucifer and another named Spectre, but I don't think this one is either of them. I'm not entirely sure which one it is, or if it's just something completely new, so make of that what you will. Starbuck desperately tries to warn the others, but the Cylons move through Galactica so quickly that they're already onto the control bridge. From there, the IL series Cylon begins relaying a message to his fleet. Adama leads Apollo, Starbuck, Boomer, and a few others into a safe room where Starbuck informs Freg, Stadra's second command, of her death. Freg wants to take the Cylons head on, but Adama takes him aside, only to mysteriously let him go despite the others' protests. It's then that they see the arriving Cylon fleet. Apollo leads a small contingent, including Starbuck and Boomer, down to the hangar bay in the Vipers. Meanwhile, Adama surrenders and is brought before the IL series Cylon. However, this has all been going according to Adama's plan as he initiates Galactica's self-destruct sequence. It's then that Freg comes charging in, guns blazing, as it turns out Adama had directed him to the weapons depot earlier. Since the Galactica's explosion would not only take out himself, but also a major portion of the Cylon fleet, the IL series gives up in exchange for free passage aboard the stolen Cylon carrier. Except Adama has one last trick up his sleeve. He had Freg place several explosives on the carrier, which are then remotely detonated through Moffat once the carrier reaches the Cylon mothership. The Vipers then mop up what remains of the Cylons. Afterwards, Freg presents Adama with a computerized hollow orb containing as much of the Mytorian text that could be saved. Meanwhile, Starbuck decides to remain in his quarters and mourn Stadra's passing rather than participate in any celebrations. And so concludes the first classic Battlestar Galactica miniseries put out by Dynamite Entertainment. How was it? Well, I rather enjoyed it. I think it's pretty new reader-friendly. If you're not entirely familiar with classic Battlestar Galactica, I think you could jump on and at least understand most of what's going on. I mean, the characterization is pretty strong throughout everything. I like the banter between Starbuck and Boomer, and, well, the artwork by Carlos Rafael is pretty impressive. But one drawback on that is if you were drawn in by, say, these Dave Dorman painted covers, and then suddenly you got the rather cartoonish Carlos Rafael artwork on the inside, I can understand if you might be a little disappointed in that. Now, on the real big drawbacks, though, this does kind of feel a bit like the Starbuck and Boomer show. It feels like a lot of the other cast, like Adama and Apollo, really don't get utilized to their full potential in this. Not to mention, the women of Battlestar Galactica really get the shaft on in this book. I don't think it's with any malicious intent, but You had three prominent women on the original Battlestar Galactica series. You had Serena, you had Cassiopeia, and you had Athena, and none of them really play any type of major role in this book, and that's kind of disappointing. I mean, the only prominent woman in this is Stadra, and she gets killed. So, yeah, it doesn't give a great view of the women of Battlestar Galactica at all, unfortunately. Like I said, I don't think it was intentional, it's just that's kind of how it comes across. Not to mention the whole ending bit with the Cylons on the Galactica wreaking havoc feels a little rushed at points. Like, this is a 5-issue miniseries, and they suddenly realized, oh, we don't have a 6th issue, so maybe we don't have the time to do the Cylons running amok on Galactica as much as we want to. Maybe if they had had 6 or 7 issues, we could have gotten more of that, and the story would have felt a little bit richer and deeper. Still, though, I am going to recommend reading this. It's pretty enjoyable. I am going to give Classic Battlestar Galactica a B. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review. Hey guys, got a request for the show? Check out my Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcatproductions. And if you like the video, give it a like, share it, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. One last thing before we go. At no point in this series does Stadra ever don a Edgar Rice Burroughs A Princess of Mars-esque costume in this manner. So I have to wonder why exactly did they go with this idea for issue number 2's cover.